Hello, welcome to this video about Windows Azure BizTalk services. Today we're going to have a look at the option of hosting a mapping service inside of Windows Azure. My name's Mike Stevenson. Here's a few details about me, and I'm an experienced BizTalk and Windows Azure consultant and also part of the Microsoft MVP program. In this quick video we're going to talk about one of the real-world use cases that you may choose to implement with Windows Azure BizTalk services. In this case we're going to look at a mapping service. Many BizTalk developers will be aware of use cases where customers have tried to take advantage of the mapping features that come with BizTalk and possibly host a service on a BizTalk node that would let you call a web service which could transform the data using a BizTalk map and then just returning that data back. And one of the big powerful features of BizTalk has been this transformation engine. And now that we have BizTalk services in the cloud, I wanted to explore what options there might be for doing a similar pattern. In this service we're going to host a Windows Azure bridge that'll host the mapping service, and then we'll look to see if we can call that from an external client. If we take a look at what this pattern may look like, so you can see here inside of Windows Azure we've got the BizTalk services feature which would contain a bridge. In that bridge we're going to have the HTTP source for the bridge which will accept a message from the client. We'll have a transform in the bridge, and then every bridge has to have a destination. So in this case we're going to look at the loopback destination. And for this loopback destination I've basically just used the WCF loopback behavior and binding that's available on the internet as another community project, and I've just slightly modified that to host it inside of Windows Azure. And all that's going to do is accept a message and just simply return it back, so it goes back out the bridge without actually calling a real end system. And you can see this bridge is fairly straightforward. If we look at options of how you may extend this pattern, so one of the cool features of BizTalk services is the maps ability to hook into an external data source. So for example, if you were going to be transforming data and needed to do some lookup values from one system to another, or simply looking up reference data, we could host a SQL Azure database in the cloud and the map could interact with that. We're not going to touch that in this particular video, but that's just to show you what some of the extensions to this pattern could be. Next, if we scaled that up and we considered this particular demo is about the mapping of one type of message, but actually in BizTalk services you can have many bridges, and you could simply build a bridge for each mapping service that you required, and you could just have a schema, a map, and the bridge would actually do the transform for you. So that could mean you'd have the option to host a lot of mapping services in a single BizTalk services node. Now let's take a look at a demo of this. So if I'm over in Windows Azure, and if I'm over in Visual Studio, and you can see I've got a solution here which, if you saw my first video, is very similar to the initial BizTalk services demo I did about how you could do some of the development techniques. So we have a acme.wabs.services project here which is going to have the main BizTalk services stuff in it. We've got an input schema, so we're going to take a person with a first name and a last name as our input message. We're going to output another person which is in a different namespace, where we're going to just provide the full name, and in the map we're going to simply concatenate those two elements together to produce the output name. So it's going to be first name, then a space, then last name, and that's going to be transformed to the output message. If we take a look at the itinerary, you can see we've got a very simple itinerary here where we've got the person mapping service bridge and the loopback adapter, and I'll talk a little bit more about that loopback adapter in a moment. The loopback adapter is the destination, and that's going to simply respond with a message. So if you remember, in this particular bridge it's a request response bridge, so we need a two-way destination that can return a message that'll go back out to the original client. If we go inside the bridge, we've got the definition of the message types for the inbound and outbound message, and then we haven't really got a lot in here other than we've got the person map that I showed you just before, and that's going to transform the message. It'll go to the destination and then come back out to the original caller. Now if we take a look at the utilities project, and one of the first things in here is we've got the adapters bit, and I've got a folder with the loopback adapter in. So this is the code that I mentioned earlier, which is from a community sample of how to implement a loopback WCF behavior. And I haven't really changed any of the code other than just the namespace for this, and it's a pretty vanilla WCF binding. And if we take a look in the bridge and we went into the config for this, you can see in here we define some details for this loopback adapter. So we've got the binding element here, which references my binding element in the utilities project, and we've also got the loopback binding, which is defined again in the utilities project. And then in the endpoint we simply have the details for that particular WCF configuration here, which is pretty standard biztalk services stuff, where we've got the generic WCF contracts here, but we're referencing the loopback adapter binding. Other than that, there's not really a lot more to this project. I've got a couple of classes here generated from the schema for use in the testing, and I've got the this sort of build processes I showed in a previous video for how to package up and deploy this solution to biztalk services. And if we have a look, I've already got my biztalk services namespace set up here, and it's pretty vanilla setup. And if I go into the portal here, and just to demonstrate this, we'll just clean out what we already have. So my previously deployed instance here. If we just refresh this, and then if we go into the resources, and I'll just delete the schemas, delete the transform, and then delete the assemblies. Now in the build script, if you remember from the previous video I did, the build will actually take care of all this cleanup, but we're going to go I'll do it manually just to prove it's been done in the video. One thing to note is that in this particular project, because I'm using the loopback adapter, I need to include the Microsoft.serviceModel.channels assembly, and I've got that being loaded up as part of the build process. So if we now go into the folder for my solution, and I've got my build.debug.command file here, and if we run that, you can see it starts doing the cleanup, compiling the solution, and then it's going to package it up and start deploying it to Windows Azure biztalk services. And you can see the artifacts are being deployed there now. That takes a few moments for some of the artifacts to deploy, because the assemblies, some of them are a little bit bigger. And then I've got some tests in here written with spec flow, and you can see that the tests passed there as part of that that automated build and deploy. And in a moment we'll go and have a look at what that test actually did. So if we just jump back to biztalk services here, and if we refresh the portal, you'll be able to see that we now have our people mapping service bridge, and we've got our input and output schema transforms back, and so are our assemblies. So now let's have a quick look at the the tests project just to see what we're doing here. And in the acceptance tests, I've got a feature called mapping service, and it's quite simple, but in order to offer a simple cloud data mapping service, as an integration architect, I want to host a WABS bridge which can map some data from one format to another. And to test this, I have a scenario where I'm going to take an input message, I'll call the cloud mapping service, I'll get a response back, and then I'll just validate that that data has been correctly transformed. So let's have a look under the hood what's going on. And to begin with, I have the test message. So we've got the class I mentioned earlier that's generated from the schema, and I'm going to set that up, and then in SpecFlow I'm going to insert that into the context for my test to allow me to get it later on. The when statement, so if I'm just going to delete the breakpoints to make it look a bit tidier. So the when statement is when we're actually going to call this particular bridge. So I grab out of the context, I'll grab my input message, and then I've got this utilities class called the bridge message sender, which is really similar to any of the samples you've seen for calling a bridge. It takes care of getting the access token from the ACS and calls the bridge and gets a response. So I'm going to set my runtime details, which are going to come from the config file. If we have a quick look at that, see I've got my ACS namespace, the bridge address, which includes the person map and service bridge, and then my ACS details here. And I've got an extension method here which is just going to convert the input message object to an XML string, and then I'm going to send that using the message sender. And you can see here we're going to do a little bit of stuff to get set the URLs up. We're going to get a token from ACS, which we can have a look at in a second. And this just uses the default way of making a REST call to the access control service to get your token. And then back up at the top, once we've got the token, we're going to make the call to send it to the bridge. If we have a quick look at that, you can see here we're going to just use the web client's upload string method. It's pretty much the same as what the Visual Studio BizTalk Services Server Explorer tool does when you want to do a test message. So we're going to make that call, upload the string, we'll get a string coming back, and we can then convert that back to the output object. So if we have a look here, when we get the string back from the test, we'll save that to the context for SpecFlow, and then in the next section, when we want to test that response, I'm now going to grab that string out of the context and convert it to an object from XML, which again just an extension method, and then I'm going to pass in the strong type for the message generated from that schema, and then I can just do a couple of asserts to make sure it's we've got a valid message back, and then finally I can do another assert down here to make sure that the full name that came back was the value I expected based on the input value at the start. So you can see that basically is a pretty straightforward test. And if we just have a quick demo of that in action, so we just run the test now. That's going to go and call the bridge in the cloud, transform the data, and we'll see that we got a successful response back. And if we check the output here, and you can see the details from SpecFlow just confirming each step was executed successfully, and we got a good transformed message back. So just to summarize this video, we can see that with Windows Azure BizTalk services we can quite easily create a mapping service which is very lightweight but could also do some more powerful things if we wanted to. With this particular pattern there may be some constraints that you could have. Maybe with the old way of doing it in BizTalk you've got the full power of the BizTalk server product which has got other things like the ability to hook into a rules engine, or the ability to perhaps more easily call into other systems that might be on premise. So you probably, as of today with BizTalk services, you might not be able to implement some of those things that you could on premise, but certainly a lot of the lighter weight stuff and a lot of the patterns that you might just do where it's very vanilla transformation could dead easily be shoved into a nice easy sandbox in the cloud, and you can just call it as a REST service. And I think it opens up a few new ideas of how you could use BizTalk in the cloud, and hopefully this video is quite useful for people and shows how easily it could be implemented.